Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 164. Today, the Amateur Traveler goes to Zanzibar. Learn about the food, the culture, and a bit of the history of this tropical paradise.
Got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have two news stories for you. The first one is good news for travelers because a study released December 1st suggests there may be a new cure for jet lag, or at least one in sight, something called VEC 162, also known as Tasimelteon. Developed by Maryland-based Vanda Pharmaceuticals, it reportedly mimics the body clock in restoring melatonin, helping long-term travelers adjust to new time zones, sleep soundly, and awake feeling rested. All of this so far with a minimum of side effects. This drug is not ready for use yet, so you gotta be patient, I'm afraid. And then, in news of the weird, an Australian men's magazine has asked beachcombers to keep a sharp eye out for 130,000 inflatable breasts that got lost en route from Beijing to Sydney. The story wasn't exactly clear why they ended up on Australian beaches, but I'm sure there is a joke there somewhere. I'm not sure what it is, but if you have figured it out, leave a comment on the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Tadzio, who's coming to us right now from Belgium, but originally from the island of St. Martin in the Caribbean, and coming to talk to us about a different island paradise, which is Zanzibar. Tadzio, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So why Zanzibar? Well, where is Zanzibar, first of all? I'm not sure that everybody can even place it on the map.
Well, Zanzibar, it's a part of Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
Tanzania is actually the name for two countries. During the colonial times, Tanganyika was German East Africa, and then the Zanzibar archipelago was a group of islands that were off the coast of Tanganyika. When the time of colonialism passed, those two countries became one country, Tanzania. So it's off the east coast of Africa, and it is part of Tanzania. And what people don't realize that Zanzibar is actually the name of an archipelago. So Zanzibar is a group of islands which is made up of Unguja. Unguja is what people now refer to as Zanzibar, where Stonetown and all the beaches are.
Okay.
The other main island, which is Pemba, which is a really low-key, laid-back, rural island to the north of Unguja Island.
And I was excited to have you on the show. In fact, I should tell you that Tadzio gave me a choice of several different places. We may have to have him come back on to talk about some other places, but Zanzibar, or Unguja, was a place that I tried to get to when I was in Tanzania and just couldn't manage to fit it into my schedule, what with the flight connections and such. So I'm excited to hear about a place that I almost got to see. What led you to Zanzibar?
Well, for a month I was working on a small island right off of the main island of Unguja called Chumbe. And Chumbe is an ecological resort. It's a private island, and there's a small eco-resort on the island that has actually won quite a number of environmental awards from the United Nations, etc. The reason I was there was because it was a month of Ramadan, and during the month of Ramadan, the rangers that are on the island are not allowed to swim in salt water. They're not allowed to have anything past their lips from sunrise to sunset. That included any water activities, which they might have some water past their lips.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I was there for a month doing research. That included both socioeconomic research and coral reef research, and I also had the opportunity to guide some tours on the reefs surrounding Chumbe. So I was on this deserted island for a month, and then after that month finished, I went to mainland Unguja, the island Unguja, and then stayed there for a while, and then I traveled to Pemba, and then after that through mainland Tanzania.
Now, as I recall from my trip to Tanzania, the religious makeup of that country is about 40% Christian, about 40% Muslim, and then 20% animist. Is that higher a percentage of Muslims in the area there on the coast that had more of the contact with the Arab traders?
Yeah, that's right. Zanzibar, so the whole archipelago was a center for commerce, I would say, from the Middle Ages on to the last century. The spices, which the island is very famous for, and the slave trade. It's the Arab slave trade, so the slave trade, not the one that went to the Western world, but the one that went to Arabia. Zanzibar was actually the center for that. That particular slave trade was actually conducted by the British and the people from the Arab countries. So it's predominantly a Muslim society, I would say.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And so if somebody was going to Zanzibar and they had a week or 2 weeks, what kind of an itinerary would you recommend? What should they see?
The first thing you see when you go to Zanzibar, it's Stonetown.
Okay.
And Stonetown is just this maze of little streets and of medieval buildings and a mix of different cultures. It's just absolutely amazing. Also nice restaurants and friendly people. I would base myself out of Stonetown. And once you get to know Stonetown, the ins and outs of the place, I would definitely suggest a spice store. And a spice store is where you go, usually with a tour guide. You go to a spice farm and they show you all the different spices that the island is known for. Nutmeg, cinnamon, just name it, they have it there. That's definitely a highlight which I would suggest. And the other things I would suggest on Zanzibar are going to Jozani Forest, which is a protected area in the middle of the island, and it's known for its red colobus monkeys, which are endemic to Zanzibar. But also just go to the north where there are beautiful beaches, good snorkeling, good diving. There's a place called Mbweni. It's an area with a hotel on it. And there are some beautiful ruins that you can visit. And there are also bush babies, which are small primates that come out at night. You can see those too. And
a bush baby is similar to a lemur, as I recall?
Yeah, it's quite similar to a lemur. It's just the cutest, smallest little primate with the big eyes. I don't know if you ever saw Madagascar.
Oh, right. Okay.
I'd also suggest going to Prison Island, which is an island just off the coast. About 200 years ago, they imported those huge tortoises from the Seychelles. So you can also find big tortoises there, and you can look at them and feed them and take a picture with them. Also, I would suggest Chumbe. I mean, if you like snorkeling and if you like just being in contact with the sea, I would just recommend you go there for, it's an amazing experience to wake up in the morning and to go snorkeling with dolphins, and then in the afternoon to have the people make something for you to eat there. It's an amazing experience.
And that sounds like a place we should go to if we want to either just relax on the beach or enjoy water activities, mostly.
Yeah, it's primarily snorkeling.
Okay.
There is a forest on Chumbe, but there's nothing there to do. There's no telephone, there's no electricity hardly. So if you go there just to relax. They do have the coconut crabs. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Those I don't know.
They're actually related to the hermit crab, and they're about 2 feet across.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, and they call them coconut crabs because they climb up coconut trees and they snip down coconuts. So you don't want to get your finger caught in between. Yeah, they're quite amazing. I mean, there's so much to do actually on Zanzibar. Like I said, go to the north. If you like those resort areas, you can go swimming, go diving, snorkeling with dolphins. It's quite popular. And then you can also go to Pemba, which is a whole different experience altogether.
And what was the highlight for you of all that you saw or all that you did?
Chumbe was a highlight for me because that's where I stayed. I just had my Robinson Crusoe fantasy for a month. But I was there for the month of Ramadan, so people that I met and the friends that I made, they were kind of low-key because they were fasting.
Mm-hmm.
But once Ramadan was over, they went with me to mainland Zanzibar, to Unguja, where they just had the biggest 3-day-long street party with music and food. And that was definitely the highlight of my trip.
Okay. What was the biggest surprise?
Well, I come from the Caribbean, and the biggest surprise for me was the similarities between the two cultures.
Okay.
So the Swahili culture and the Caribbean culture, they were quite similar to me. Many things were familiar to me, such as food and customs, even the way they talk and the way they interact with each other. That was quite surprising.
And is that because of the African influence on the Caribbean, or just living in tropical areas, or?
Of course, it's because of the African influence in the Caribbean, but I also think that just living in a tropical area, that many things that people do around that latitude are the same the world over, I think.
What sort of things are you thinking of?
Just the way people live outside as opposed to living inside all the time.
Okay.
And just their, happiness at life, I would say.
Well, sure. If you live in a tropical paradise, that'd be easier, you'd think.
Yeah,
But
it's understandable, yeah.
you mentioned Stonetown. We talked a little bit about going to a spice market there. Did you also get to see the old slave market that's there?
There's not much left anymore. It's now the site of the Anglican Church.
Uh-huh.
And it's also a budget guest house on the area. You can go inside and look at the holding cells and the area where they used to sell the slaves. There's a plaque erected in their honor. But just to go to the site where they used to hold the slaves, like their holding cells, I think they used to house maybe 30 or 40 slaves in an area that wasn't much bigger than your standard bathroom.
Wow.
So it's quite an experience to see the conditions in which they lived.
What did you do to prepare for it? What sort of resources did you use to prepare for your trip?
Well, I used the standard guidebooks. Lonely Planet and the Rough Guides, they were a great help.
Okay.
And then, of course, use your internet resources. I'm quite an avid diver, so I checked out the dive websites and went to discussion boards, asking them what suggestions they may have regarding diving and where I might be able to stay for cheap, because, I was on a budget. Other than that, I read a couple of books and I visited my doctor. And one thing I must recommend is that people go to the cash machine before they leave to go to Zanzibar, because there are hardly any cash machines there. So it's good to have all your cash with you.
Oh, okay. So it's more difficult than in the mainland then?
Yeah, mainland, it was quite easy in Dar es Salaam and Arusha to go to the cash machine, but it's not that easy in Zanzibar.
Okay, good to know. And then you mentioned you'd looked up the best dive spots, best dive and snorkel spots that you found.
Unguja, so what people refer to as Zanzibar, the best snorkeling is Chumbe. I don't know, I can't say it enough. And towards the north of the island, there are a couple of resort areas from which you can leave to go diving. But they have the Pemba Atoll, which is on the northeastern side of the island, if I remember correctly. It's not too deep, it's not too technical diving, the current isn't that strong. And it's just an amazing variety of fish life and coral. And then for the more experienced divers, there's the Leven Bank, which is between Zanzibar and Pemba, so between Unguja and Pemba Island. Hope I'm not confusing people too much. It's a deep dive. It's known for bigger pelagics like manta rays, whale sharks. Once in a while you see a swordfish swim past. And then Pemba Island itself, it's one of the holy grails for East African diving. That one of the least unexplored places where you can actually dive on a dive site that nobody has dove before. So I would definitely recommend people go to Pemba. It's not as easy to get lodging, it's not as easy to find a dive operator, but I think it's worth the trip.
And let's talk about lodging. You mentioned you found a cheap place to stay. Where did you stay? Would you recommend it?
I stayed at a place called the Pyramid Hotel.
Okay.
Stonetown is not that big, so there are numerous budget guest houses in Stonetown.
And when we're saying budget, how cheap is a budget hotel there?
I did about $15 to $20 a night would be the less. You have an ensuite bathroom, you have a nice bed with a mosquito net. They're all more or less in the same area. Everything is within walking distance. So, yeah, I would suggest Pyramid Hotel. Breakfast is included with that, so you don't have to worry about that.
And then you got to Zanzibar. You flew or you took the boat from Dar es Salaam?
Well, I left from Europe, so I took the plane from Frankfurt. I made a stop in Mombasa, and then I landed in Zanzibar.
Okay.
But you can also go to Dar es Salaam or Nairobi. There are a couple of connecting flights through there. You can catch the ferry from Dar es Salaam.
And then you mentioned mosquito netting, and we really should tell people a little bit about that. You were on, I assume, malaria prophylactics the whole time?
Yeah, there are 3 different ones you can take. Because I was there for a long time, I went for the cheap option.
Oh, so you were on the Larium.
No, I took the cheaper option than that, which is doxycycline, which is an antibiotic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that as an option.
Because I was on a desert island for a month, they advised me not to take Laraben because of the psychological effects that yeah.
Sure. Yeah, we've talked about that in a previous show.
So yeah, I had to take doxycycline for a month and then make sure I covered myself up in DEET and use mosquito netting.
Okay.
Which is fine. But I was there during the dry season, so I didn't really have that much trouble from mosquito bites. I must say, when I got back to Europe, I had a little fever, and I was pretty worried about it, but it turned out just to be a flu.
Getting around in the island, were you taking the buses around to the different beaches or such, or how are you getting around?
Well, because I was based in Stonetown, I just used that as my base.
Mm-hmm.
Close to the market, there's a Dala stand. Dalas
Okay.
are the buses. Yeah, some of them are just pickup trucks that have a shading over them, and then a couple of benches nailed to the bed of the pickup truck, and that's a bus. But yeah, it's fine to take one of those. You can take one from Stonetown to anywhere in the island. It's cost maybe 500 shillings or 250 shillings, which is just 25 cents or 50 cents.
Now, I know some people are a little leery about the Dala because they do pack them pretty tight often.
There were two types of Dalas that I took. There was one that was just your standard minibus
Right.
with a place to sit inside. And I took one once and I sat on people's laps and people sat on my laps. So I decided not to take one of those anymore. I just took the one that I mentioned, the pickup truck, which is
Where you're standing up at the back of the bed?
yeah, stand up at the back of the bed or sit down or hang off at the back of the truck. If anything happens, it's easy for you to just jump off.
Yes, of course, I've also been in a hospital in Tanzania and seen some of the injuries that happen when those get in an accident. Not necessarily the safest means of transportation, but definitely inexpensive.
Yeah, it is inexpensive. I mean, you can also rent a scooter,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's less safe even than taking a Dala.
Probably.
And then there's your standard taxi cab. People say that it was cheaper than other places in East Africa, but standard taxi ride costs you $10. So I just took the Dala, walked or jumped on a scooter.
And we talked a little bit about the resources you used to prepare, and I forgot to ask, are there things that you thought that they left out, or are there things that you thought that they oversold? What was your impression?
I don't really think they left out anything. I think
Okay.
they were pretty good at mentioning everything that is worth seeing. I mean, like, with any resource, you use it to do your research, and then you go discover for yourself what you like or what you don't like. You also talk to people while you're on the island, and they can give you recommendations. There was one thing that I didn't really find was that interesting, were the resort areas that they mentioned in the north, which are Kendo and Nungwi.
Okay.
I mean, these are beach resort areas that are completely packed with travelers, and you have fake Maasai coming down the street who, aggressively try to sell you arts and crafts that...
Well, and of course, the Maasai wouldn't be part of that culture.
No, not at all.
Interesting. Is that mostly a European crowd there?
Yeah, I think mostly a European crowd. There were
Okay.
some Israelis, but mostly Italians and French people. When I was there, I ate on the streets, I ate at people's houses, places where you had questions about how clean the places were, and I didn't have any problems. And when I went to that side of the island and I stayed at one of those resorts, I ate at the restaurant. I ended up staying in bed for 2 days from food poisoning, so...
Well, so much for that.
Yeah, so much for that. If you like doing that stuff, by all means, go and have your beach holiday, but that's not something that I like to do, so...
Okay, so it's again one of those resorts that's a little more isolated from the real culture there.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then the food, you mentioned eating on street food. Is it similar? I've eaten, obviously, in Tanzania. Are we talking about ugali, which is the corn paste and meat, or are we talking something very different in the islands?
Yeah, thankfully, I mean, that's my preference. There was not really that much ugali.
Okay.
You know, I'm not a big fan of the ugali.
It wasn't my favorite either.
No, actually, rice is more widely eaten on Zanzibar.
Oh, that makes
Yeah, they
sense.
have this amazing dish called chicken pilau, which is just chicken with spices and a rice dish. It's just absolutely amazing. But yeah, their food is more spice than it is on mainland Tanzania, just because, you know, it is a
Spices
spice
are right there.
island.
Sure.
so.
Okay. That makes sense.
I would definitely suggest that people go to eat at the Forodani Gardens, which is just an outdoor area with stalls and...
In Stonetown, or?
Yeah, it's in Stonetown.
Okay.
As soon as the sun sets, these vendors, they put out their stalls and they put out a bunch of kerosene lanterns all over the place, and it looks like you're in Aladdin 1001 Nights, and you can get sugarcane juice and kebabs, you know, anything you want, you can eat at the stall. So I definitely recommend that. One strange thing that on Pemba, they actually have bullfights.
Really?
It's a legacy of colonialism because for a while it belonged to the Portuguese. So you can actually go there and see Portuguese-style bullfighting on a little island off the coast of East Africa, which is kind of far out.
Now, in the Portuguese-style bullfighting, the bull walks away at the end, or is that the French-style I'm thinking of?
The bull walks away at the end.
Okay.
He doesn't walk away happy, but he walks away at the end.
A little different than the Spanish style.
Yeah, they're not killed.
So it's more like where people are showing their bravery by, I want to say dancing around in front of the bull, but that's not really quite the right term, but basically showing that they are not afraid.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Here's a sentence for you. How would you complete this sentence? You really know you're in Zanzibar when...
Oh, that's a tough one. It can be one sentence, and you could write a whole book about that. I would say you really know you're in Zanzibar when you're sitting down at Stonetown under the big tree, and there's a bunch of guys trying to get you to go to Prison Island with them, and all of a sudden a monkey just jumps up out of the tree and steals the food that you're eating and jumps back in. That's when I know I'm in Zanzibar.
Okay. That is a great word picture. Okay.
Yeah.
And you had, unfortunately, got a little scammed with your pictures and don't have pictures of Zanzibar. Why don't you tell us that so people are ready for that scam?
That wasn't in Zanzibar. That was in Dar es Salaam. So
okay.
Yeah, when I finished traveling around in Zanzibar, I took the ferry to Dar es Salaam. And I had a night at a youth hostel before I took my bus to go up to Arusha to go on safari. Mm-hmm. And there was a place that said you can clear the pictures off of your SD card, off of your memory card, from your camera, and burn the pictures on a CD. And then, they would give you the CD and you pay the money. But when I burnt it, they gave me a bum CD, so I didn't have any pictures on the CD. So basically, I paid money for an empty CD. So I lost all of my pictures from my time in Zanzibar.
So I guess our lesson there is make sure you have the pictures are on the CD before you delete them from the camera.
Yeah, the thing is, the guy who did it, first he deleted all the pictures off of the card and then gave me the CD. While I was having dinner, he just came by and dropped the CD for me and then dropped the memory card. And being a trusting person that I am, I accepted it for what it was and I gave him the money. And then when I got home, I tried to check my pictures and they weren't on there. So I would just suggest you go with a couple of memory cards for your camera so that you wouldn't have to go through that.
We've talked about malaria. We talked about the bum CD. Any other warnings you would give?
Because Zanzibar, it's quite conservative Muslim society. I mean, I would suggest that, especially women when they go there, to cover their shoulders and to wear pants or skirt that are below the knee and to just be aware that culture that you're in. I mean, there's no type of oppression or anything. That's the way things are done over there.
Sure.
And also, if you do happen to be there for Ramadan, it's recommended that you don't drink or eat on the street between, sunrise and sunset.
Right. Don't be obvious about the fact that you're eating. Right. Good tip.
Yeah, I mean, just the standard, be aware of your surroundings at night and always travel in well-lit areas. You should be fine. It's quite safe. Actually, when I was in Zanzibar and I was about to leave to go to mainland Tanzania, everybody was telling me not to go there because it's unsafe and I'll get hustled and I'll get robbed. But I mean, I was quite fine in both places. So.
The most memorable person you met?
That's not a fair question because I think everybody that I met was just amazing people. I've never been to a place where I'm accepted with such open hands before. I was invited to eat at people's house. People that I just met 20 minutes ago, I just went to eat by their house the same evening. So it's not limited to one person that I met. I think it's just the whole culture and all the people of Zanzibar that are absolutely amazing. And I'm trying to think, but I can't really peg down one person that really made an impression that stood out from the rest of the people that I met.
Okay. And I assume you got by mostly in English. Did you learn some Swahili also?
Kidogo. I learned a little bit.
Okay. A little, he says.
Yeah. As you go to Paris, you learn a little bit of French. It just opens doors for you. And same thing with Zanzibar and Tanzania as a whole. If you just learn the basics of Swahili, it's not that difficult a language. You should be able to get by quite fine. I mean, everybody speaks English. They're much happier if you try at least to speak a little bit of Swahili.
As we go to wrap this up, if you had to summarize Zanzibar in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I would say magical.
Yeah.
I would say ultra-friendly, which is actually 2 words, but, you can hyphenate it.
I'll give you that.
I would say just natural. Just the natural beauty of the place is what really struck me as sublime, actually. especially the diving and the snorkeling, if that's what you like. It's definitely the place to go off of the east coast of Africa.
Tadzio, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us a little more about Zanzibar.
You're very welcome.
I have one internet resource for you today, but sort of two, because I learned this resource from Johnny Jet, johnnyjet.com, which is a site that has all sorts of travel resources and travel tips. And the one that I learned from him most recently is biddingfortravel.com. And biddingfortravel.com is a site which is a good one to check out if you're planning on using Priceline to do travel auctions, to bid for how much you're willing to pay for that hotel or that particular plane trip. Check out biddingfortravel.com first, and it'll give you some good guidelines in terms of what's a good price to bid, for instance. And you can find a link to that in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. In news from the community, I got a letter from Linda at the Indie Travel Podcast. Craig and Linda are friends there, who was talking about their adventures in Transylvania. She says, my favorite memory was one evening when we jumped into a taxi in Timisoara just to be taken into town for dinner. The taxi driver asked if we were going to the wine festival. We hadn't heard anything about a wine festival, but a hasty conference resulted in us agreeing with the driver and being dropped off near a stadium where a huge food and wine festival was in full swing. It was amazing, so much fun and a fantastic memory. Another example of why it's always good to get connected to the locals while you're someplace. You might learn about things you would otherwise have no clue about. Linda, thanks for sharing that with us. I also got a great letter from Emily, and Emily wrote and said, I have listened to your podcast regularly for over 6 months, the new ones and a few of the older ones. I just wanted to let you know how much I really appreciated the recent San Francisco podcast because its release was timed perfectly with my first trip there. I just got back yesterday. My husband was going there for a conference, so I had 2 days to explore the city on my own, and because I had been very busy at work, I had not planned much in advance other than the Alcatraz reservation. And that's always a good idea. After listening to episode 159, I downloaded the Sound Seeing Tour episodes. I listened to them on the plane there or in the coffee shops in the city while eating breakfast. The first day, I followed the first Sound Seeing Tour almost exactly, and the second, I explored Golden Gate National Park, seeing Crissy Field and even the wave organ. Unfortunately, I was there at low tide. The information you provided gave me a much greater appreciation for the city. My husband will attest to the fact that when we were together, I would often say, my podcast said. I think he really appreciated the Bushman warning. Ah, yes, the Bushman. And if you haven't heard the Sound Singing episode, well, you don't know what Emily and I are talking about. Anyway, thanks and keep up the great podcast, Emily. It's letters of encouragement like that that do keep me podcasting, even when I am recording at times like now, where it's after midnight. Do put a lot of effort in this, so it's nice to know that someone's listening. With that, we'll bring this episode to a close. If you have any comments, feel free to send me an email, as Linda and Emily did, or leave a comment on theamateurtraveler.com. As always, thanks so much for listening.